Welcome to Scary Phantom, where the eerie meets the soothing. Every night, I bring you thrilling horror stories that not only send chills down your spine but also help you unwind for a peaceful sleep. Relax, listen, and let the stories take you away to a world where the dark is both exciting and calming. There was an old wardrobe in my room that always felt strange to me. It was an imposing piece of furniture, with dark, polished wood and intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story of its own. The wardrobe had been in the room when I moved in, and despite my initial reservations, I decided to keep it. After all, it was functional and added a certain charm to the otherwise bland room. However, the unease it brought me grew with each passing day. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, its door would creak open just a little. At first, I thought it was just the lock being loose, but no matter how many times I tried to fix it, the problem persisted. The creaking always seemed to happen when the house was at its quietest, and the darkness outside pressed against the windows like a heavy, suffocating blanket. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. But the feeling of being watched, of something lurking just beyond the edge of my vision, never fully left me. It was as if the wardrobe itself was alive, watching and waiting. One night, I found myself watching TV late into the night. I had work in the morning, but the restless energy in my body wouldn't let me sleep. The room was dimly lit, the only light coming from the flickering screen and a small lamp on the bedside table. The house was silent, the usual sounds of the city outside muffled by the thick walls. Around 2 a.m., when everything was still and quiet, I noticed the wardrobe door move slightly. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but the air conditioning was off, and the windows were tightly shut. I tried to shrug it off and turned the TV volume up a little, hoping to drown out the unsettling feeling that was creeping over me. But then, I heard a soft knock-knock. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but the sound sent a shiver down my spine. It was as if someone was tapping from inside the wardrobe. My breathing grew heavy, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I slowly grabbed the remote and muted the TV. Now, all I could hear was the eerie silence of the house, and the soft tap-tap sound from inside the wardrobe. It was like someone was knocking, gently, as if they were trying to get my attention without causing alarm. I turned on my phone's flashlight and aimed it at the wardrobe. The door was slightly more open than before, and inside, I could see a shadow. A faint, shifting shadow, as if someone was standing there in the darkness. My heartbeat pounded in my ears, and I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. I hesitated, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts, but I finally gathered the courage to reach forward and open the door wider. And what I saw made my blood run cold. Inside the wardrobe, there was a man. He looked exactly like me. Every single feature was identical. Same face, same clothes, same everything. Except for one thing. His lips were cracked and torn, as if someone had ripped at them. His throat had a deep, dark gash, as if it had been slit open. And his eyes, they weren't normal. They were small, completely black, and lifeless. He just stood there, staring at me. Then, slowly, one of his hands emerged from the wardrobe. Long, thin, and eerily blackened fingers stretched toward me, as if trying to pull me inside. I felt paralyzed, unable to scream, unable to breathe. My mind was a whirlwind of fear and confusion, but then suddenly, I found my voice and let out a terrified scream before running out of the room. I spent the entire night in the living room, unable to close my eyes for even a second. When the sun finally rose, I gathered enough courage to check the wardrobe. I slowly pulled the door open, half expecting to see the same terrifying figure from the night before. But it was empty. Completely empty. As if there had never been anyone inside. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a nightmare, a product of my overactive imagination. But the memory of those black, lifeless eyes and the feeling of being watched refused to leave me. I decided to do some research, hoping to find an explanation for what I had experienced. The old house I lived in was built in the early 1900s, and it had a long and mysterious history. I dug through old records and local archives, piecing together the story of the house and its previous occupants. One name kept coming up: Jonathan Blackwood. He was the original owner of the house, a wealthy businessman with a dark reputation. Rumors circulated that he had dabbled in the occult, performing strange rituals in the dead of night. According to the legends, Jonathan Blackwood had a twin brother, but the brother had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some said he had been murdered, while others believed he had been trapped in a different dimension. The story of the twin brother was never fully resolved, and the house remained shrouded in mystery. As I delved deeper into the history, I discovered that the wardrobe had been a part of the house since it was built. It was said to be a family heirloom, passed down through generations. The carvings on the wardrobe were more than just decorative. They were symbols of ancient rituals and incantations, designed to trap and contain dark entities. The more I learned, the more I realized that the wardrobe was not just a piece of furniture. It was a portal, a gateway to another realm. The figure I had seen in the wardrobe was not just a doppelganger. It was a manifestation of a dark force, a shadow of myself that had been trapped within the wardrobe for decades. I tried to rid myself of the wardrobe, but it seemed to be rooted in the room, impossible to move. Every time I tried to touch it, I felt a strange, tingling sensation, as if the wood itself was alive. The more I tried to ignore it, the more it seemed to assert its presence. The nights grew longer and more terrifying. The wardrobe door would creak open at exactly 2 a.m., and I could hear the faint tapping sound, as if the entity inside was trying to communicate with me. I began to notice other strange occurrences around the house. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I would find objects moved from one place to another. The air in the room grew colder, and a thick, oppressive silence settled over everything. I reached out to a local paranormal investigator, a woman named Dr. Evelyn Carter, who specialized in cases like mine. She was skeptical at first, but after hearing my story and seeing the house for herself, she agreed to help. Dr. Carter brought with her a team of experts, equipped with the latest technology to detect paranormal activity. We set up cameras and sensors in my room, hoping to capture evidence of the entity in the wardrobe. The night of the investigation was tense, and I could feel the air crackling with energy. As the clock struck 2 a.m., the wardrobe door creaked open, and the tapping sound grew louder. The cameras captured the shadow moving inside the wardrobe, and the sensors detected a significant drop in temperature. Dr. Carter and her team tried various methods to communicate with the entity, but it remained silent and unresponsive. They performed a cleansing ritual, using sage and other herbs to purify the room. For days after the ritual, the house seemed quieter, and the strange occurrences ceased. I began to hope that the entity had been banished. However, my relief was short-lived. One night, I woke up to the sound of the wardrobe door creaking open. I held my breath, waiting for the tapping sound, but it didn't come. Instead, I felt a presence in the room, as if something was watching me. I turned on the light, and to my horror, the figure from the wardrobe was standing at the foot of my bed. It was me, but it wasn't. The same face, the same clothes, but the eyes were still black and lifeless. The lips were cracked, and the throat bore the deep, dark gash. It reached out a hand, and I could see the long, blackened fingers stretching toward me. I screamed and backed away, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with those empty, black eyes. I called Dr. Carter, and she rushed over to help. Together, we tried to perform another cleansing ritual, but this time, the entity was more powerful. The room grew colder, and the air became thick with a suffocating darkness. The figure in the wardrobe seemed to grow more solid, more real. It stepped out of the wardrobe and moved toward me, its movements slow and deliberate. I felt a sense of dread wash over me, as if I was being pulled into a nightmare from which there was no escape. Dr. Carter and her team tried to hold the entity back, but it was too strong. The figure reached out and touched me, and I felt a cold, numbing sensation spread through my body. I could feel my consciousness slipping away, as if I was being replaced by the entity. In a last desperate attempt, Dr. Carter used a powerful incantation, and the room was filled with a blinding light. The entity recoiled, and for a moment, it seemed to be vanquished. But as the light faded, I realized that the figure was still there, standing at the foot of my bed. It looked at me with those black, lifeless eyes and smiled. The smile was twisted, cruel, and it sent a chill down my spine. I knew then that the entity was not going to be banished easily. It was a part of me, a dark reflection of my own fears and doubts, and it was determined to take my place. The days that followed were a blur of fear and uncertainty. I could feel the entity's presence in the room, even when I couldn't see it. The wardrobe door would creak open at 2 a.m., and the tapping sound would echo through the house. I tried to move out of the house, but the entity seemed to follow me wherever I went. It was as if it was bound to me, and there was no escape. I began to see the entity in my dreams, and the lines between reality and nightmare became blurred. I couldn't tell if the figure was a manifestation of my own mind or a separate entity. The more I tried to fight it, the stronger it seemed to become. One night, as I lay in bed, I realized that the only way to end this was to confront the entity head-on. I gathered my courage and walked over to the wardrobe. The door was slightly open, and I could see the shadow inside. I took a deep breath and opened the door wider. The figure was there, standing in the darkness. It looked at me with those black, lifeless eyes, and I felt a surge of fear. But I also felt a sense of determination. I knew that I had to face my fears, to confront the darkness within myself. "I know who you are," I said, my voice steady. "You are a part of me, a reflection of my own fears and doubts. But I will not let you control me." The figure didn't move, but I could feel a shift in the air. It was as if the entity was considering my words. I took a step forward, and the figure stepped back. I continued to speak, pouring out my fears and doubts, my hopes and dreams. I talked about my past, my present, and my future, and as I did, I felt the entity's grip on me loosening. Finally, the figure began to fade, its form becoming less solid. The black, lifeless eyes lost their intensity, and the twisted smile disappeared. I could feel the darkness lifting, and the room grew lighter. The wardrobe door closed on its own, and the tapping sound ceased. I collapsed on the bed, exhausted but relieved. I knew that the entity was not completely gone, but I had taken the first step in reclaiming my life. The wardrobe remained in the room, a constant reminder of the battle I had fought, but it no longer held the same power over me. The nights that followed were different. The wardrobe door no longer creaked open at 2 a.m., and the tapping sound was gone. The house felt lighter, and the air was no longer thick with fear. I began to sleep better, and the nightmares faded. But I knew that the entity was still there, waiting for the right moment to strike. I had to stay vigilant, to keep the darkness at bay. The wardrobe was a symbol of my inner struggles, and I had to face them head-on. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months, I grew stronger. I learned to embrace my fears and doubts, to turn them into sources of strength. The wardrobe remained in the room, a silent witness to my journey, but it no longer held the same power over me. And so, I lived my life, knowing that the entity was still there, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced my fears and come out the other side, stronger and more resilient than ever before. The wardrobe was a reminder of the darkness I had overcome, and I was determined to keep it at bay, no matter what. The night was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that makes the smallest sound seem amplified. I was hunched over my laptop, the only light in the room emanating from its screen. The glow cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the darkness beyond the screen's reach seem even more profound. I was engrossed in my work, typing away on a project that had been nagging at me for weeks. The room was a mess, with papers scattered across the desk and clothes strewn about, but I hardly noticed. My focus was entirely on the task at hand. It was around midnight, and the house was still. My parents were out of town, and the only other occupant was my cat, Luna, who was curled up on the bed, her soft purring the only other sound in the room. The air was cool, and I pulled my blanket tighter around my shoulders, the chill seeping in through the old, drafty windows. Everything seemed normal until I noticed a silhouette outside the window. At first, I thought it was just a tree or a shadow of something, but when I looked again after a while, the silhouette had moved closer. My heart skipped a beat, and I paused, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but the feeling of unease lingered. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. It was probably just a neighbor or a stray animal, I told myself. But the more I stared, the more the silhouette seemed to take on a more defined shape. It was humanoid, standing just outside the window, partially obscured by the darkness. My body froze, and the only sound I could hear was my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears. Slowly, I picked up a flashlight and pointed it outside. The beam of light cut through the darkness, illuminating the area around the window. And what I saw drained the blood from my veins. There was something standing there. Something that looked like a man. Its eyes were completely white, glowing in the darkness. Its face was twisted in an unnatural way, as if it wasn't human at all. The most horrifying part was its lips. They were moving, as if whispering something, but there was no sound. I reached out to shut the window, my hands trembling. But before I could, its hand was already on the window frame. Its nails were long and jagged, like an animal's claws. A soft, chilling voice echoed in the silence. "Can I come in?" For a second, I thought I was dreaming. But this was no dream. I stumbled back in shock, my laptop crashing onto the floor, turning off and plunging the room into total darkness. I looked back at the window, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The silhouette was gone, but the sense of dread remained, clinging to me like a thick fog. I stumbled to the bed, my legs weak and unsteady. Luna, sensing my distress, jumped down and rubbed against my leg, her soft fur a small comfort in the overwhelming fear. I sank to the floor, my back against the bed, and tried to make sense of what had just happened. It felt like a nightmare, but the cold sweat on my skin and the rapid beating of my heart told me otherwise. I stayed there for what felt like hours, too afraid to move. The darkness seemed to press in around me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me. Eventually, I gathered the courage to stand and cautiously approached the window. I peered outside, my heart racing, but there was nothing there. The street was empty, the only movement the gentle sway of the trees in the night breeze. I closed the window and drew the curtains, my hands shaking. I turned on the lamp on my bedside table, the warm light casting away some of the shadows. I sat on the edge of the bed, my mind racing with questions. Who, or what, had I seen? Was it a hallucination, or was it real? And if it was real, what did it want? I tried to calm myself, reminding myself that there were logical explanations for everything. Maybe it was a prank, or a homeless person looking for shelter. But the more I thought about it, the less convinced I became. The figure had seemed too deliberate, too intent. And those eyes, they were unlike anything I had ever seen. I decided to check the rest of the house, just to be sure. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and slowly made my way through each room, my heart pounding with every step. The house was empty, and there was no sign of anyone else being there. I double-checked the backyard, but it was just as deserted as the front. By the time I returned to my room, I was exhausted. I climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to my chin, and tried to sleep. But sleep eluded me, and I lay there, wide awake, listening to the sounds of the night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, made me jump. I felt like I was being watched, and the feeling only intensified as the hours passed. Finally, as the first light of dawn began to seep through the curtains, I drifted off into a fitful sleep. When I woke up, the sun was high in the sky, and the house was filled with the familiar sounds of the morning. I got out of bed, feeling a bit more grounded, and decided to tell my parents what had happened. But when I tried to recount the events of the night, the words seemed to stick in my throat. It all sounded so absurd, so unbelievable. I couldn't bring myself to share it, afraid they would think I was losing my mind. So I kept it to myself, telling myself it was just a strange, vivid dream. Days passed, and I tried to put the incident out of my mind. I threw myself into my work, hoping the distraction would help. But every time I stood near the window, I felt a chill run down my spine. The memory of those glowing eyes and that twisted face haunted me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, hiding in the darkness, watching me. One evening, a week after the incident, I was working late again. The room was dark, and the only light came from my laptop screen. I was so focused on my work that I didn't notice the silence until it was too late. The usual background noise of the house had faded, and the room was eerily quiet. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. There it was again, the same silhouette outside the window. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my hands trembling. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but the figure was too distinct. It was standing there, just like before, its eyes glowing in the darkness. I could feel its presence, a cold, oppressive weight in the room. I reached for the flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly that I dropped it. It clattered to the floor, the beam of light scattering across the room. I backed away, my eyes never leaving the window. The figure was getting closer, its hand reaching out towards the window frame. "Can I come in?" The chilling voice whispered again. I stumbled back, my mind racing. I had to get out of there, but the door seemed so far away. My heart was pounding in my chest, and I could feel the cold sweat on my skin. I tried to call out, to scream for help, but no sound came out. The room felt like it was closing in around me, and I was trapped. Just as the figure's hand touched the window, there was a sudden loud noise. It was the sound of a car door slamming, and then the unmistakable voice of my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, calling out to his dog. The figure outside the window vanished as quickly as it had appeared, and the room was plunged back into silence. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking with relief and fear. I lay there for a few moments, trying to catch my breath. When I finally found the strength to stand, I checked the window again. There was nothing there, no sign of the figure. But the feeling of dread remained, and I knew that something was still out there, waiting. I decided to talk to Mr. Thompson, hoping he might have seen something. He was a kind, elderly man who had lived in the neighborhood for years. When I knocked on his door, he opened it with a warm smile, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hello there," he said. "What can I do for you?" "Mr. Thompson, do you ever see strange things at night?" I asked, my voice trembling. He raised an eyebrow, his expression curious. "Strange things? Like what?" "I saw a figure outside my window a few nights ago," I explained. "It looked like a man, but it wasn't right. Its eyes were glowing, and it was whispering. I thought I was going crazy, but then it happened again tonight." Mr. Thompson's expression changed, and he leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Strange things, you say? I've heard stories, old legends about this neighborhood. They say there's something, not quite human, that lurks in the shadows. Some people call it the Watcher. They say it appears to those who are alone, and it's always watching, always waiting." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "The Watcher? Do you think it's real?" Mr. Thompson shrugged, his eyes distant. "I've never seen it myself, but I've heard rumors. Some people say it's a spirit, a guardian of sorts. Others say it's something more sinister. But one thing's for sure, once it sets its sights on you, it doesn't let go easily." I thanked him and left, my mind reeling. The Watcher? Could it be true? Was there really something out there, watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike? I spent the next few days in a state of heightened alertness, always on edge. I kept the curtains drawn and the windows locked, but the feeling of being watched never left me. I tried to distract myself with work and social activities, but the memory of those glowing eyes and that twisted face haunted me. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft tapping at the window. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I slowly turned around, my eyes fixed on the window. There it was again, the same silhouette, its hand reaching out towards the glass. "Can I come in?" the chilling voice whispered. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to get out of there, but the room felt like a trap. I tried to call out, to scream for help, but my voice was stuck in my throat. The figure was getting closer, its hand pressing against the window. Just as it was about to break through, there was a sudden loud noise. It was the sound of a car alarm, and then the blaring of a siren. The figure outside the window vanished, and the room was plunged back into silence. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking with relief and fear. I lay there for a few moments, trying to catch my breath. When I finally found the strength to stand, I checked the window again. There was nothing there, no sign of the figure. But the feeling of dread remained, and I knew that something was still out there, waiting. I decided to do some research, hoping to find more information about the Watcher. I scoured the internet, read old newspaper articles, and even visited the local library. I found a few references to strange occurrences in the neighborhood, but nothing concrete. The stories were always vague, and the details were inconsistent. One day, while I was browsing through old newspaper archives, I came across an article from the 1950s. It was a brief mention of a series of unexplained disappearances in the area, all occurring at night. The article mentioned a local legend about a mysterious figure that appeared to people in their homes, always asking the same question, "Can I come in?" The article didn't provide much more information, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I decided to dig deeper, hoping to find more clues. I visited the local historical society and spoke to the archivist, a kind woman named Mrs. Johnson. "Have you heard of the Watcher?" I asked her, my voice trembling. She raised an eyebrow, her eyes narrowing. "The Watcher? Yes, I've heard of it. It's an old legend, a story that's been passed down through generations. Some people say it's a guardian spirit, while others believe it's something more sinister. Can you tell me more about it?" I asked, my heart pounding with anticipation. Mrs. Johnson sighed, her expression somber. "The legend says that the Watcher appears to those who are alone, always at night. It's said to be a harbinger of doom, a sign that something terrible is about to happen. Some people believe it's a manifestation of their deepest fears, while others think it's a real entity, a being that feeds on fear and loneliness." I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Have you ever seen it?" Mrs. Johnson shook her head. "No, I've never seen it myself. But I've heard stories. Some people say it's a warning, a chance to escape before something worse happens. Others say it's a curse, a sign that you're marked for something terrible." I thanked her and left, my mind racing. The more I learned about the Watcher, the more convinced I became that it was real. But why was it targeting me? What did it want? I decided to reach out to a local paranormal investigator, hoping to get some answers. His name was Jack, and he was known for his expertise in the field. I explained my situation to him, and he agreed to help me. Jack arrived the next evening, armed with a variety of equipment. He set up cameras and sensors around my room, hoping to capture any signs of the Watcher. We sat in the darkness, our only light coming from the screens of the cameras. The room was tense, and I could feel the weight of the silence. As the night wore on, we saw nothing out of the ordinary. The cameras showed the empty street outside, and the sensors detected no unusual activity. I was beginning to feel a sense of relief, thinking that maybe the Watcher had moved on. But just as I was about to suggest we call it a night, the cameras flickered, and the room was plunged into darkness. I heard a soft tapping at the window, and my heart skipped a beat. I turned around, my eyes fixed on the window. There it was again, the same silhouette, its hand reaching out towards the glass. "Can I come in?" the chilling voice whispered. Jack was quick to react, grabbing a flashlight and shining it outside. But the figure was gone, and the room was plunged back into silence. We checked the cameras and sensors, but they showed nothing out of the ordinary. It was as if the Watcher had vanished into thin air. Jack was as puzzled as I was. "I've never seen anything like this before," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "It's like it's playing with us, taunting us." We decided to keep the cameras and sensors running, hoping to catch the Watcher in action. But the next few nights were uneventful, and I began to wonder if it had really been a figment of my imagination. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard a soft tapping at the window. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I slowly turned around, my eyes fixed on the window. There it was again, the same silhouette, its hand reaching out towards the glass. "Can I come in?" the chilling voice whispered. I backed away, my mind racing. I had to get out of there, but the room felt like a trap. I tried to call out, to scream for help, but my voice was stuck in my throat. The figure was getting closer, its hand pressing against the window. Just as it was about to break through, there was a sudden loud noise. It was the sound of a car alarm, and then the blaring of a siren. The figure outside the window vanished, and the room was plunged back into silence. I collapsed to the floor, my body shaking with relief and fear. I lay there for a few moments, trying to catch my breath. When I finally found the strength to stand, I checked the window again. There was nothing there, no sign of the figure. But the feeling of dread remained, and I knew that something was still out there, waiting. I decided to reach out to a local psychic, hoping to get some answers. Her name was Alara, and she was known for her ability to communicate with the spirit world. I explained my situation to her, and she agreed to help me. Alara arrived the next evening, her presence calming and reassuring. She set up a small altar in the center of the room, lighting candles and incense. She asked me to sit across from her and close my eyes, focusing on my breath. "Relax," she said, her voice soothing. "Let go of your fears and open yourself to the energy around you." I did as she asked, trying to clear my mind. After a few moments, I felt a warm, comforting presence, and I began to feel more at ease. Alara began to speak in a soft, rhythmic voice, her words weaving a tapestry of sound. "Open your mind and let the energy flow. Feel the connection to the world around you. Let go of your doubts and fears and embrace the truth." As she spoke, I felt a shift in the energy of the room. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and I could sense the presence of something else. I opened my eyes, and to my surprise, I saw a faint, ethereal figure standing in the corner of the room. It was the Watcher, but it looked different. Its form was more translucent, and its eyes, while still glowing, were less menacing. It seemed to be watching me, but there was no malice in its gaze. Alara continued to speak, her voice steady and calm. "The Watcher is not here to harm you. It is a guardian, a protector. It has been watching over you, guiding you through the darkness. But it needs your trust, your understanding." I felt a wave of relief wash over me. The Watcher was not a threat, but a guide. It had been trying to communicate with me, to help me navigate the challenges I was facing. I reached out to it, my hand trembling, and it responded, its form becoming more solid. "Can I come in?" it whispered, its voice no longer chilling but gentle. I nodded, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The Watcher stepped forward, its form becoming more defined. It stood before me, its eyes glowing with a warm, golden light. It reached out and placed its hand on my shoulder, and I felt a surge of energy, a sense of peace and understanding. "You are not alone," it said, its voice resonating in my mind. "I have been watching over you, guiding you through the darkness. But you must trust in yourself, in your strength and your courage. Only then can you overcome the challenges that lie ahead." I felt a sense of clarity, a deep understanding of my own fears and doubts. The Watcher was not a threat, but a guide, a protector. It had been there all along, helping me navigate the darkness. I thanked Alara and the Watcher, feeling a sense of relief and hope. The Watcher vanished, leaving behind a sense of peace and calm. I knew that the challenges ahead would be difficult, but I also knew that I was not alone. From that night on, the Watcher no longer appeared outside my window. Instead, I felt its presence, a guiding force that helped me through the darkness. I learned to trust in myself, in my strength and my courage. And I knew that no matter what lay ahead, I was not alone. The Watcher had been a test, a challenge to help me grow and overcome my fears. And in the end, it had shown me that the greatest power I had was within myself. The journey begins. It was the summer of 2023, and the sun was setting over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the tranquil waters of the Pacific. The air was filled with the sweet scent of salt and the distant hum of seagulls. My friends and I had been planning this trip for months, and finally, the day had arrived. We were a group of 5: Alex, the adventurous one; Mia, the artistic soul; Jake, the joker; Emma, the practical one; and me, the storyteller. We had all grown up together, and this trip was meant to be a break from the mundane routines of our lives. We arrived at the small, secluded island late in the afternoon. The island, known locally as Whispering Cove, was a hidden gem, rarely visited by outsiders. The ferry ride from the mainland had been smooth, the sea calm and inviting. As we stepped off the boat, we were greeted by the island's caretaker, an elderly man named Mr. Thompson. He had a weathered face, lined with years of sun and sea, and a kind smile that put us at ease. "Welcome to Whispering Cove," he said, his voice tinged with a hint of mystery. "I hope you enjoy your stay. Just remember, the island has a mind of its own. Respect it, and it will respect you." We nodded, intrigued by his cryptic words, but too excited to let them dampen our spirits. Mr. Thompson led us to our cabin, a quaint wooden structure nestled among the trees, a short walk from the beach. The cabin was simple but cozy, with a large porch overlooking the sea. We spent the first few hours unpacking and settling in, the sound of the waves providing a soothing backdrop to our chatter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the sky turned a deep shade of orange, painting the clouds in hues of pink and purple. We gathered on the porch, sipping on cold drinks and watching the sunset. The air was cool, and a gentle breeze rustled through the leaves. It was the perfect setting for a night of relaxation and camaraderie. But as the night deepened, a sense of restlessness began to settle over us. The beach, with its moonlit sand and the rhythmic lapping of the waves, called to us, beckoning us to explore. Alex, always the one to suggest the most daring ideas, was the first to speak up. "Hey guys, what do you say we take a walk down to the beach?" he asked, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "It's a beautiful night, and who knows what we might find?" Mia, ever the dreamer, was quick to agree. "That sounds amazing. I've always wanted to see the beach at night. It must be so different from the day." Jake, the joker, chimed in with a mischievous grin. "I heard the beach at night is haunted. Maybe we'll run into a ghost or two." Emma, the practical one, hesitated. "I don't know, guys. It's getting pretty late, and Mr. Thompson did say the island has a mind of its own. Maybe we should just stay here and enjoy the view." I, the storyteller, was torn. On one hand, I was drawn to the idea of a midnight adventure. On the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. But the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. I looked at my friends, their faces illuminated by the moonlight, and I knew we were all thinking the same thing. "All right, let's do it," I said, my voice filled with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "But let's be careful. We don't want to end up in any trouble." With that, we grabbed our flashlights and set off down the path that led to the beach. The air was cooler now, and the sound of the waves grew louder as we approached. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows and giving the beach an ethereal glow. We walked in silence, the only sounds the rustling of the leaves and the occasional call of a night bird. As we reached the edge of the beach, the wind picked up, sending a chill down our spines. The sand was soft and cool under our feet, and the water lapped gently against the shore. We stood there for a moment, taking in the beauty of the night, the vast expanse of the ocean stretching out before us. But as we stood there, a sense of unease began to creep over us. The wind was strong, but there was an eerie silence, as if even the ocean had stopped breathing. The waves, which had been calm and rhythmic, now seemed to be holding their breath. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, and the moonlight seemed to dim, casting the beach in a ghostly pallor. It was then that we realized we were not alone. The wind was strong, but there was an eerie silence, as if even the ocean had stopped breathing. The waves, which had been calm and rhythmic, now seemed to be holding their breath. The air was thick with an unexplainable tension, and the moonlight seemed to dim, casting the beach in a ghostly pallor. The rustling of the leaves and the distant calls of night birds had faded, leaving us in a world that felt suspended in time. We stood there, frozen, the silence pressing down on us like a heavy weight. The sand beneath our feet felt cold and damp, and the water lapped against the shore with a soft, almost hesitant sound. The moon, once a bright beacon in the sky, now seemed to be a pale, distant observer, its light barely piercing the thick, oppressive darkness. Mia, ever the artist, was the first to break the silence. "This is so strange," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It's like the whole world is holding its breath." Jake, trying to lighten the mood, chuckled nervously. "Maybe the island is just getting ready for a big reveal. You know, like one of those dramatic pauses in a horror movie." Emma, ever the practical one, scanned the beach with her flashlight. "I don't like this. We should head back. This place gives me the creeps." But Alex, always the adventurer, was undeterred. Come on, guys, it's just the wind and the moon. Let's explore a little more. We might find something interesting. I, the storyteller, was torn. The eerie silence and the oppressive atmosphere were making my skin crawl, but the allure of the unknown was too strong to resist. I took a deep breath and nodded. All right, let's go a little further. But stay close and keep your flashlights on. We moved cautiously down the beach, the sand crunching softly under our feet. The wind continued to howl, but the silence remained, a strange contradiction that only added to the unsettling atmosphere. As we walked, the beach seemed to stretch on endlessly, the moon casting long, distorted shadows that danced and twisted in the darkness. Suddenly, Mia stopped in her tracks, her flashlight beam catching something that made her gasp. Guys, look at this. We turned our flashlights in the direction she was pointing, and what we saw made our blood run cold. Etched into the sand were a series of strange symbols, almost like hieroglyphs, but unlike anything we had ever seen before. The symbols were intricate, with swirling lines and shapes that seemed to form a pattern, but one that was impossible to decipher. What is this? Emma asked, her voice trembling. It looks like some kind of ancient writing. Alex, ever the curious one, knelt down to examine the symbols more closely. I've never seen anything like this. They look old, maybe even centuries old. Who would come out here and carve these into the sand? Jake, still trying to keep things light, laughed nervously. Maybe it's a message from the island. Beware of the sea monster, or something like that. But the symbols were no joke. They seemed to pulse with an otherworldly energy, and the longer we stared at them, the more we felt a strange, almost hypnotic pull. It was as if the symbols were trying to communicate with us, to draw us deeper into their mystery. Mia, her artistic instincts kicking in, began to sketch the symbols in her notebook. We should document this. It's too strange to ignore. As she sketched, the wind suddenly picked up, and a chill swept over us. The symbols in the sand seemed to shift and blur, as if they were alive and moving. The air grew colder, and the silence around us deepened, becoming almost tangible. Guys, we need to leave, Emma said, her voice urgent. This is getting too weird. But before we could move, a sudden, sharp scream pierced the night. It was a sound that sent shivers down our spines, a sound that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean itself. Look, there's someone in the water, Alex shouted, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating a figure in the distance. We all turned to look, and what we saw stole our sleep forever. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness and illuminating the water's edge. At first, all I could see was the gentle lapping of the waves, the moonlight reflecting off the surface in a shimmering dance. But as I adjusted the focus, a figure became visible, sitting at the edge of the water, its silhouette stark against the dark sea. The figure looked human, with a shape that could have been mistaken for a person from a distance. But as we drew closer, the details began to reveal themselves, and what we saw made our blood run cold. It was a figure, but it had no legs. Instead, a long, black, slimy tail slithered into the sand, moving with a fluid grace that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. The tail was thick and muscular, with scales that glistened in the moonlight, reflecting a sickly green hue. It moved with a purpose, as if the creature was anchored to the beach by some unseen force. Is that a mermaid? Mia whispered, her voice barely audible over the pounding of our hearts. But this was no mermaid. The figure turned its head slightly, and we caught a glimpse of its face. It was pale, almost translucent, with features that were both familiar and alien. The eyes were what truly chilled us to the bone. They were pure white, with no pupils, no irises, no hint of life or soul. They stared at us with a cold, unblinking gaze, as if they were looking through us, into the very depths of our souls. As we took a step closer, the figure slowly lifted its head, and we were met with a face that was both beautiful and horrifying. The skin was smooth and flawless, but it lacked the warmth and life that should have been there. The lips were thin and colorless, and the hair, long and dark, flowed around the figure like a shadow. The creature's eyes locked onto ours, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. The wind howled around us, but the silence of the beach remained, a stark contrast to the chaos of our minds. The creature's presence was overwhelming, a tangible force that pressed down on us, making it hard to breathe. And then, in a voice that didn't sound human, it whispered, "You shouldn't be here." The words were soft, almost a caress, but they carried a weight that was impossible to ignore. The voice was deep and resonant, with an echo that seemed to come from the very depths of the ocean. It was a voice that spoke of ancient secrets and forgotten lore, a voice that carried the weight of centuries. The waves, which had been calm and rhythmic, suddenly began to crash violently against the shore. The water churned and frothed, as if the sea itself was reacting to the creature's presence. The sand beneath our feet began to shift, and the air grew colder, as if a storm was brewing. In the blink of an eye, the creature slipped into the water, its tail disappearing beneath the waves as if it had never been there. The beach, which had been so still and quiet, was now alive with the sound of crashing waves and howling wind. The symbols in the sand began to blur and fade, as if they were being erased by an unseen hand. We stood there, frozen, the realization of what we had just witnessed sinking in. The creature, the symbols, the eerie silence, all of it was too much to process. The beach, which had seemed so beautiful and serene just moments ago, was now a place of dread and unease. Without a word, we turned and ran back to the cabin, our hearts pounding in our chests. The wind chased us, the sound of the waves growing louder with each step. We didn't stop until we reached the safety of the cabin, the door slamming shut behind us. Inside, we huddled together, the silence of the night still hanging heavy in the air. The events of the past few minutes played over and over in our minds, each detail more terrifying than the last. The creature, the symbols, the voice, all of it was etched into our memories, a haunting reminder of the night we had ventured too close to the edge. But the night was far from over. The island, with its secrets and mysteries, was just beginning to reveal itself, and we were only just beginning to understand the true nature of Whispering Cove. Back in the safety of the cabin, we huddled together, the silence of the night still hanging heavy in the air. The events of the past few minutes played over and over in our minds, each detail more terrifying than the last. The creature, the symbols, the voice, all of it was etched into our memories, a haunting reminder of the night we had ventured too close to the edge. "Did any of you actually see that?" Emma asked, her voice trembling as she tried to make sense of what we had just experienced. Was it real, or was it just a trick of the light? Mia, still clutching her sketchbook, shook her head. "I sketched it, Em. It was real. I saw it, and I drew it. There's no denying it." Jake, who had been trying to keep things light, now looked pale and shaken. "I don't know what to think. It was like something out of a nightmare. A mermaid, but not a mermaid. Something else." Alex, ever the adventurer, was the first to regain his composure. "We need to figure out what that thing was, and why it was there. There's more to this island than we thought." I, the storyteller, felt a strange mix of fear and fascination. I've heard stories of creatures that live in the depths of the ocean, beings that are half human, half something else. But I never thought I'd see one for myself. The cabin was small, and the close quarters only added to the sense of claustrophobia. The walls seemed to close in around us, and the darkness outside felt like a living, breathing entity, watching and waiting. "We should tell Mr. Thompson," Emma suggested, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "He said the island has a mind of its own. Maybe he knows more about what we saw." But the thought of venturing back out into the night, even to speak with the caretaker, was too much to bear. We decided to wait until morning, to gather our thoughts and plan our next move. The night was long and restless. None of us could sleep, the memory of the creature's white eyes and the eerie symbols in the sand haunting our every thought. We took turns keeping watch, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, searching for any sign of movement. As the first light of dawn began to filter through the windows, we gathered our courage and set out to find Mr. Thompson. The cabin was a short walk from the beach, and the path was familiar, but the morning air was different. It was cooler, and the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, as if the night had drained the color from the world. We found Mr. Thompson by the dock, his weathered face illuminated by the rising sun. He was repairing a fishing net, his hands moving with the practiced ease of years of experience. As we approached, He looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Good morning, young folks," he said, his voice as kind as ever. "Did you enjoy your night on the beach?" We exchanged uneasy glances, and it was Alex who spoke first. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk to you. We saw something unusual last night." The old man's expression didn't change, but his eyes seemed to grow darker. "What did you see?" We took turns recounting the events of the night, from the eerie silence to the strange symbols in the sand, and finally, the creature with the white eyes. As we spoke, Mr. Thompson's face grew more serious, and he nodded slowly, as if he had expected this. "Whispering Cove has many secrets," he said, his voice low and solemn. "The island has been here for centuries, and it has a history that goes back even further. The symbols you saw are ancient, older than any of the records we have. They are a warning, a message from a time long forgotten." "What about the creature?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "What was it?" Mr. Thompson sighed, a deep, heavy sound that seemed to carry the weight of the world. "That, my friends, is a creature known as a kappa. In the old stories, they are water spirits, half human, half fish. They are said to lure unsuspecting travelers to their doom, to the depths of the ocean where they guard ancient secrets and treasures." The word kappa sent a shiver down our spines. It was a name we had heard in tales, but never thought we would encounter in reality. "Why did it warn us to leave?" Mia asked, her voice filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. "The kappa is a guardian of the island's secrets," Mr. Thompson explained. "It protects the ancient knowledge and the hidden treasures. When it speaks, it is a sign that you have ventured too close to something that should remain hidden. You should take its warning seriously." We stood there, the weight of his words settling over us. The island, with its secrets and mysteries, was more than just a place of beauty and tranquility. It was a place of power, a place where the lines between the known and the unknown blurred. "Is there anything we can do to protect ourselves?" Emma asked, her practical side taking over. Mr. Thompson nodded. "Respect the island and its guardians. Stay away from the water at night, and avoid the areas where the symbols are found. The kappa is a powerful being, and it will not hesitate to act if it feels threatened." We thanked Mr. Thompson for his advice and returned to the cabin, our minds racing with the new information. The day passed in a blur of whispered conversations and restless pacing. We couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that the island itself was a living, breathing entity, and we were just temporary visitors in its domain. As the sun began to set once more, we gathered on the porch, the same place where we had started our adventure the night before. The sky was a deep shade of orange, and the air was cool, but the sense of unease remained. We couldn't help but feel that the island was still holding something back, that there were more secrets waiting to be uncovered. "We should leave," Emma said, her voice firm. "This place is too dangerous. We don't know what else might be out there." But Alex, ever the adventurer, was hesitant. "We can't just leave without understanding what we saw. There's more to this island, and we need to find out what it is." Mia, who had been quiet, spoke up. "Maybe we should try to find the source of the symbols. If they are a warning, maybe they can lead us to the truth." Jake, who had been unusually quiet, nodded. "I agree with Mia. We need to know what we're dealing with. But we have to be careful. We don't want to end up like the kappa's next meal." I, the storyteller, felt a strange pull to uncover the island's secrets. "Let's do it. But we need to be smart about it. We'll stick together, and we'll be careful." With a sense of determination, we agreed to explore the island further, to uncover the secrets that lay hidden in its depths. The night was once again calling to us, and we knew that we had to face it head-on. As we set out, the moon rose high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the beach. The wind was strong, but there was an eerie silence, as if the island was holding its breath, waiting to see what we would do next. The moon was high in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the beach as we set out to uncover the secrets of Whispering Cove. The wind was strong, but the eerie silence remained, a stark reminder of the night before. We moved cautiously, our flashlights cutting through the darkness, the beam of light illuminating the path ahead. We decided to follow the symbols we had seen the previous night, hoping they would lead us to the source of the island's secrets. The symbols, which had seemed to blur and fade after the Kappa's appearance, were now more distinct, as if they were calling to us. As we walked, the symbols began to form a trail, leading us deeper into the heart of the island. The path was overgrown, the underbrush thick and tangled, but we pushed through, our determination driving us forward. The air grew cooler, and the sound of the waves faded into the distance, replaced by the rustling of leaves and the occasional hoot of an owl. The forest around us was dense, the trees towering and ancient, their branches reaching out like bony fingers. As we ventured deeper, the symbols became more intricate, their patterns more complex. They seemed to tell a story, a tale of ancient times and forgotten lore. Mia, with her artistic eye, began to sketch the symbols as we encountered them, her hands moving quickly over the pages of her notebook. "Look at this," she said, her voice filled with awe. "These symbols are telling a story. It's like a map, leading us to something important." We followed the trail, the symbols guiding us through the forest. The path led us to a small clearing, where the moonlight shone down, illuminating a stone altar. The altar was ancient, its surface weathered and covered in moss, but the symbols were clear, etched deeply into the stone. "What is this place?" Emma asked, her voice hushed as if she was afraid to break the silence. Alex, ever the adventurer, approached the altar, his flashlight beam dancing over the symbols. "It looks like some kind of ritual site. The symbols are more detailed here, almost like a message." Jake, who had been unusually quiet, stepped closer. "Do you think this is where the Kappa comes from? Maybe it's a gateway or something." I, the storyteller, felt a strange pull to the altar. Let's see if we can decipher the symbols. They might hold the key to understanding what we're dealing with. We gathered around the altar, our flashlights casting shadows that danced on the ground. The symbols were arranged in a circular pattern, each one more intricate than the last. Mia began to translate the symbols, her artistic skills and keen eye helping us piece together the story they told. "The symbols are telling a story of an ancient civilization," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "They speak of a time when the island was a sacred place, a haven for those who sought knowledge and power. The Kappa, it seems, is a guardian of this knowledge, a protector of the island's secrets." As she spoke, the symbols began to come to life, their meaning becoming clearer. They spoke of a powerful being, a guardian of the island's ancient knowledge, who had been summoned to protect the secrets of the past. The Kappa, it seemed, was not just a creature of legend but a living embodiment of the island's power. But the symbols also warned of a great danger, a threat that had been sealed away long ago. The Kappa's warning, "You shouldn't be here," was not just a caution but a dire warning. The island was a place of balance, and our presence had disrupted that balance. As we stood there, the air grew colder, and the wind howled around us, as if the island itself was reacting to our discovery. The symbols on the altar began to glow, a soft, ethereal light that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. The ground beneath our feet trembled, and the trees rustled, as if they were whispering secrets to the wind. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the clearing, a deep, resonant voice that seemed to come from the very earth itself. "You have found the source of the island's power. But you must leave now, before the balance is shattered." The voice was the same one we had heard the night before, the voice of the Kappa. But this time, it was not a whisper but a command, a warning that could not be ignored. "We need to go," Emma said, her voice urgent. "This place is dangerous. We don't want to anger the Kappa or whatever else is here." But Alex, ever the adventurer, was hesitant. "We can't just leave without understanding what we've found. There's more to this island, and we need to know what it is." Mia, who had been sketching furiously, looked up. "I think we've seen enough. The symbols have given us a glimpse of the island's history, but we don't need to push our luck. Let's go back to the cabin and figure out what to do next." Jake, who had been unusually quiet, nodded. "I agree with Mia. We need to be smart about this. We don't want to end up like the Kappa's next meal." I, the storyteller, felt a strange pull to uncover more, but the voice of reason in me knew that we had to be cautious. "Let's go back. We can regroup and decide what to do next." But we need to be careful. The Kappa is a powerful being, and we don't want to anger it. With a sense of reluctance, we left the clearing, the symbols on the altar glowing faintly in the moonlight as we retreated. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees whispering secrets that we could not understand. The path back to the cabin was longer and more treacherous, the darkness and the wind making every step feel like a challenge. As we emerged from the forest, the beach was calm, the waves lapping gently against the shore. The moonlight cast a silvery glow over the sand, and the air was cooler, the silence of the night a stark contrast to the chaos we had just experienced. We returned to the cabin, the weight of our discovery settling over us. The night was long and restless, the memory of the Kappa's white eyes and the glowing symbols haunting our every thought. We huddled together, the silence of the night still hanging heavy in the air. The next morning, we gathered on the porch, the first light of dawn filtering through the windows. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and the air was cool, but the sense of unease remained. We knew that the island had more secrets to reveal, and we were determined to uncover them, but we also knew that we had to be cautious. "We need to talk to Mr. Thompson again," Emma said, her voice steady despite her obvious fear. "He knows more about the island than he's letting on. Maybe he can help us understand what we saw." But as we set out to find Mr. Thompson, a sense of dread settled over us. The island, with its secrets and mysteries, was more than just a place of beauty and tranquility. It was a place of power, a place where the lines between the known and the unknown blurred. And we were only just beginning to understand the true nature of Whispering Cove. The next morning, we set out to find Mr. Thompson, our minds heavy with the weight of the previous night's revelations. The air was cool, and the sky was a pale, washed-out blue, as if the night had drained the color from the world. The path to Mr. Thompson's cottage was familiar, but the morning light made everything seem different, more ominous. We found Mr. Thompson by the dock, his weathered face illuminated by the rising sun. He was repairing a fishing net, his hands moving with the practiced ease of years of experience. As we approached, he looked up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Good morning, young folks," he said, his voice as kind as ever. "Did you find what you were looking for?" We exchanged uneasy glances, and it was Alex who spoke first. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk to you. We found an ancient altar in the forest, and the symbols on it told us a story. But we don't understand everything. Can you help us?" Mr. Thompson's expression grew more serious, and he nodded slowly. "Come, let's sit and talk. This is a story that has been passed down through generations, and it is not one to be taken lightly." We followed him to a small, weathered bench by the dock, the wood worn smooth by years of use. The sun was higher now, casting a warm glow over the water, but the air remained cool, and the sense of unease lingered. "Whispering Cove has a long and complex history," Mr. Thompson began, his voice low and solemn. "Centuries ago, this island was a sacred place, a haven for those who sought knowledge and power. The Kappa you saw is not just a guardian, but a manifestation of the island's ancient magic. It is a protector, a being that has existed for as long as the island itself." He paused, his eyes distant, as if he was seeing the island as it once was. "The symbols you found on the altar are part of an ancient language, one that has been forgotten by most. They tell the story of a powerful civilization that once thrived on this island. These people were wise and knowledgeable, but they also held dark secrets. The Kappa, as you have seen, is a guardian of these secrets. It protects the island's ancient knowledge and the hidden treasures that lie beneath. But there is more to the Kappa than just a guardian. It is a being that is deeply connected to the island's magic, a force that can both create and destroy." We listened intently, the weight of his words settling over us. "What kind of dark secrets are you talking about?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Thompson's expression grew even more serious. The ancient civilization on this island was not without its flaws. They delved into dark magic, seeking power beyond what was natural. They performed rituals that summoned entities from the depths of the ocean, entities that were not meant to be disturbed. The Kappa was one of these entities, but it was also a protector, a being that was tasked with maintaining the balance of the island. The symbols on the altar are a warning, a message from the past. They tell of a great danger that was sealed away long ago, a threat that still lurks beneath the surface. The Kappa's warning, "You shouldn't be here," is not just a caution but a dire warning. The island is a place of balance, and your presence has disrupted that balance. We sat in silence, the weight of his words pressing down on us. The island, with its secrets and mysteries, was more than just a place of beauty and tranquility. It was a place of power, a place where the lines between the known and the unknown blurred. "What should we do?" Emma asked, her voice steady but filled with a hint of fear. "We don't want to anger the Kappa or unleash something we can't control." Mr. Thompson nodded. "You must leave the island. The Kappa's warning is a sign that you have ventured too close to something that should remain hidden. If you stay, you risk awakening the ancient forces that were sealed away long ago. The island will not take kindly to such a disturbance." We exchanged uneasy glances, the reality of our situation sinking in. The island was a place of power, and we had disrupted that power. The Kappa's warning was not something we could ignore. The last passenger. I was traveling alone in a late-night train, a decision I had made out of necessity rather than choice. The day had been long and grueling, filled with meetings and deadlines that had left me exhausted and yearning for the solitude of a quiet journey home. The train, an old creaking beast of metal and steam, was my only means of reaching my destination by morning. I had boarded at the last station, hoping for a few hours of rest to rejuvenate before the dawn. As I settled into my seat, I noticed that the entire coach was empty except for one man sitting in the farthest corner. His face was hidden under a dark hood, casting shadows that made it impossible to discern any features. The dim flickering lights of the coach created an eerie atmosphere, making every shadow seem more menacing and every creak of the train more ominous. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks was the only sound breaking the heavy silence, a constant reminder of the journey's monotony. I leaned back in my seat, feeling a mix of relief and unease. The solitude was both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, it offered a rare moment of peace away from the chaos of my daily life. On the other, the emptiness of the coach and the mysterious figure in the corner filled me with an unshakable sense of dread. I tried to shake off the feeling, attributing it to the late hour and my fatigue. I closed my eyes, hoping to catch a few moments of rest. Just as I was on the verge of dozing off, the door to the coach creaked open, and the ticket checker stepped in. His presence was a welcome distraction, a human element in the otherwise desolate environment. He glanced at his list, then at me, and his eyes widened slightly. "Sir, there was only one passenger in this coach, but he got off at the last station," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. My hands went cold, and a chill ran down my spine. If I was the only one here, then who was that man in the corner? I turned my head slowly towards him, my heart pounding in my chest. The seat was empty. No sign of him. The realization sent a wave of panic through me, and I felt the air in the coach grow colder. Just then, I felt something, a cold breath on my neck. A whisper barely audible sent shivers down my spine. I need to get off too, but no station ever lets me leave. My body went stiff. I spun around. No one was there. But the air was freezing now, and the overhead lights flickered wildly. The train jolted suddenly, almost as if something heavy had just moved inside the coach. My breathing became erratic. I gripped the seat in front of me, trying to stay calm. And then I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see in the reflection of the window. There he was, standing behind me. His hood had fallen back, revealing a gaunt, hollow face. His eyes completely black, as if they had been swallowed by darkness itself. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Instead, an inhuman growl filled the air, vibrating through my bones. I bolted from my seat, running down the aisle. The emergency chain. I had to pull it, but as I reached for it, something grabbed my shoulder. Ice-cold fingers. Claw-like grip. I turned to shove him away, but my hands passed through him like mist. And then, everything went silent. The train wasn't moving anymore. The lights had completely died. The windows showed nothing but pitch-black darkness outside. No stations, No landscape, nothing. Just an endless void. I could feel him standing right behind me, closer now. A raspy whisper slithered into my ears. "This train never stops." I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering. And then, a deafening screech. The train suddenly jerked forward, throwing me onto the floor. The lights blazed back on. The sound of tracks returned. I scrambled to my feet, breathing hard. I looked around. The coach was empty, like nothing had ever happened. When the train finally pulled into the next station, I ran out, not looking back even once. But ever since that night, whenever I travel by train, I see something. A reflection in the window. A dark figure standing in an empty coach. Still waiting. For a station that will never come. The train was an old, well-worn relic of a bygone era, its exterior weathered by years of service. Inside, the coach was a mix of faded elegance and worn-out practicality. The seats, once plush and inviting, now creaked under the slightest pressure, their upholstery frayed and stained. The windows, streaked with grime, offered a distorted view of the passing landscape, which was now nothing more than a blur of darkness. I had chosen this train for its direct route and the promise of a quiet journey. The city I was leaving behind was a bustling metropolis, a place where the constant hum of activity never truly ceased. The train station, however, had been eerily quiet when I boarded, the platforms nearly deserted. The only other passengers were a few late-night travelers, their faces obscured by the shadows of their hoods or the brims of their hats. As the train pulled out of the station, the city lights receded into the distance, replaced by the vast, unbroken darkness of the countryside. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks was a soothing lullaby, a rhythm that seemed to lull the world into a state of suspended animation. I leaned back in my seat, closing my eyes and allowing the gentle motion of the train to rock me into a state of near sleep. It was during this moment of semi-consciousness that I first noticed the man in the corner. His presence was a stark contrast to the otherwise empty coach. He sat hunched over, his body almost blending into the shadows. The hood of his cloak obscured his face, making it impossible to discern any features. His stillness was almost unnatural, as if he were a statue rather than a living being. The dim flickering lights of the coach cast long, shifting shadows, and the man seemed to be a part of them, a shadow among shadows. The air around him felt colder, as if he were a conduit for the chill that permeated the coach. I tried to shake off the feeling of unease, telling myself it was just the late hour and the eerie atmosphere of the train. As the train continued its journey, the darkness outside deepened, and the only sounds were the occasional hiss of the steam and the steady clatter of the wheels. The man in the corner remained motionless, a silent sentinel in the shadows. I found myself stealing glances at him, each time half expecting to see some movement, some sign of life. But he was as still as a statue, his presence both unsettling and mysterious. The rhythmic clatter of the train wheels on the tracks was the only constant in the otherwise silent coach. The dim, flickering lights cast long shadows, and the man in the corner remained a silent, enigmatic presence. I tried to focus on the rhythm of the train, letting it lull me into a state of near sleep, but the unease gnawed at the edges of my consciousness. Just as I was on the verge of dozing off, the door to the coach creaked open. The sound was jarring in the otherwise heavy silence, and I opened my eyes to see the ticket checker stepping in. He was a middle-aged man with a weary expression, his uniform slightly rumpled. He glanced at his list, then at me, and his eyes widened slightly. "Sir, there was only one passenger in this coach, but he got off at the last station," he said, his voice tinged with confusion. My hands went cold, and a chill ran down my spine. If I was the only one here, then who was that man in the corner? I turned my head slowly towards him, my heart pounding in my chest. The seat was empty. No sign of him. The realization sent a wave of panic through me, and I felt the air in the coach grow colder. "Are you sure?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The ticket checker nodded, his brow furrowed. "Absolutely sure. I checked the manifest, and there was only one passenger in this coach. He got off at the last station. Are you feeling all right, sir?" I forced a smile, trying to mask my growing fear. Yes, I'm fine. Just a bit tired, I suppose." The ticket checker nodded sympathetically and moved on to the next coach. As the door closed behind him, the heavy silence returned, amplified by the knowledge that something, or someone, was not as it seemed. I turned my head slightly, scanning the empty coach. The seat where the man had been sitting was now devoid of any presence, the shadows no longer hiding a figure but rather emphasizing the emptiness. The air felt heavier, colder, and the dim lights flickered more erratically. Just then, I felt something, a cold breath on my neck. A whisper barely audible sent shivers down my spine. I need to get off too, but no station ever lets me leave. My body went stiff. I spun around. No one was there. But the air was freezing now, and the overhead lights flickered wildly. The train jolted suddenly, almost as if something heavy had just moved inside the coach. My breathing became erratic. I gripped the seat in front of me, trying to stay calm. The train jolted again, and I felt a chill that seemed to seep into my bones. The overhead lights flickered more erratically, casting shadows that danced and twisted in the dim coach. The air grew colder, and I could feel a presence, something unseen but palpable, filling the space around me. I tried to rationalize what was happening, telling myself that it was just the late hour and the eerie atmosphere of the train. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The man in the corner had vanished, and the ticket checker's words echoed in my mind. He got off at the last station. I turned my head slightly, just enough to see in the reflection of the window. The coach was empty, just as it had been when the ticket checker left. But the air was thick with an unexplainable tension, and the shadows seemed to move on their own, as if they had a life of their own. Just then, I heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate, getting closer. My heart pounded in my chest, and I turned my head slightly, just enough to see in the reflection of the window. There he was, standing behind me. His hood had fallen back, revealing a gaunt, hollow face. His eyes completely black, as if they had been swallowed by darkness itself. His mouth moved, but no words came out. Instead, an inhuman growl filled the air, vibrating through my bones. I bolted from my seat, running down the aisle. The emergency chain. I had to pull it, but as I reached for it, something grabbed my shoulder. Ice-cold fingers. Claw-like grip. I turned to shove him away, but my hands passed through him like mist. And then, everything went silent. The train wasn't moving anymore. The lights had completely died. The windows showed nothing but pitch-black darkness outside. No stations, no landscape, nothing. Just an endless void. I could feel him standing right behind me, closer now. A raspy whisper slithered into my ears. This train never stops. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering. And then, a deafening screech. The train suddenly jerked forward, throwing me onto the floor. The lights blazed back on. The sound of tracks returned. I scrambled to my feet, breathing hard. I looked around. The coach was empty, like nothing had ever happened. The train jolted forward, and the lights blazed back to life, casting a harsh, unyielding glow on the now empty coach. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The sudden return to normalcy was jarring, almost surreal. The coach was empty, just as it had been when I first boarded, but the memory of the man in the corner, his chilling whisper, and the inhuman growl still lingered in my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. The air, once cold and oppressive, now felt normal, if not a bit stale. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the tracks resumed, a constant reminder that the train was still moving, still on its journey. But the sense of unease remained, a nagging feeling that something was not right. I walked down the aisle, my footsteps echoing in the empty coach. The seat where the man had been sitting was now devoid of any presence, the fabric of the seat back to its usual worn state. I ran my hand over it, half expecting to feel some lingering trace of his presence, but it was just an ordinary seat, nothing more. The coach was empty, but the memory of the man in the corner, his gaunt, hollow face, and those black, soulless eyes, was burned into my mind. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still there, hidden in the shadows, watching me. I moved to the window, pressing my face against the cold glass. The darkness outside was unbroken, a vast, impenetrable void. The train seemed to be moving through nothingness, a solitary vessel in a sea of black. I couldn't see any landmarks, no stations, no signs of civilization. It was as if the train had entered a different realm, a place where the rules of the physical world no longer applied. I turned back to the coach, my eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. The overhead lights flickered once, casting a brief, distorted shadow on the floor, and I felt a chill run down my spine. The air was still, but I could sense a presence, something unseen but palpable, filling the space around me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I needed to stay focused, to think rationally. I had to find a way to get off this train, to escape the eerie, unexplainable events that were unfolding around me. I moved quickly down the aisle, my eyes darting from one end of the coach to the other. The emergency chain was my only hope, my only way to stop the train and get off. I had to reach it, no matter what. As I approached the chain, I could feel the presence behind me growing stronger, more intense. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to thicken, as if they were alive and reaching out to grab me. I could hear the slow, deliberate footsteps again, getting closer, closer. I reached out for the chain, my fingers trembling. Just as I was about to pull it, something grabbed my shoulder. Ice-cold fingers. Claw-like grip. I spun around, ready to face whatever was behind me, but my hands passed through the figure like mist. The man in the corner was there, his gaunt, hollow face inches from mine, his black, soulless eyes staring into my soul. "This train never stops," he whispered, his voice a raspy, inhuman growl that vibrated through my bones. I felt a wave of fear and despair wash over me. The train jolted again, and I was thrown to the floor. The lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with a cold, oppressive silence, and the man in the corner loomed over me, his presence suffocating. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. I had to find a way out, but the emergency chain was useless. I needed to think of another plan, something to get me off this train before it was too late. The train jolted again, and I was thrown to the floor, the impact jarring and painful. The lights flickered wildly, casting eerie shadows on the walls, and the air grew colder, more oppressive. The man in the corner loomed over me, his gaunt, hollow face inches from mine, his black, soulless eyes staring into my soul. "This train never stops," he whispered, his voice a raspy, inhuman growl that vibrated through my bones. I felt a wave of fear and despair wash over me, but I knew I couldn't give in. I had to find a way out, no matter what. I scrambled to my feet, my heart pounding in my chest. The man in the corner was a few steps away, his presence suffocating, but I could see a faint glint of something in his hand, a small silver key. The key. It was my only hope. If I could get it, I might be able to unlock a way out of this nightmare. I lunged at him, my hands outstretched, but he moved with a speed that defied his gaunt appearance. He dodged my grasp, and I felt his cold, claw-like fingers brush against my skin, sending a shiver down my spine. I stumbled, but I didn't fall. I turned and ran, my eyes scanning the coach for any sign of an exit. The train jolted again, and I was thrown against the wall. The impact knocked the breath out of me, but I pushed myself up, determined not to give up. I could hear the man's slow, deliberate footsteps behind me, getting closer, closer. The air was thick with a cold, oppressive silence, and the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, as if they were alive and reaching out to grab me. I reached the door at the end of the coach and pulled it open, but it was locked. I pounded on it with my fists, but it wouldn't budge. The man was right behind me now, his breath a cold, icy wind against my neck. "This train never stops," he whispered again, his voice a chilling echo in the empty coach. I turned to face him, my back against the door. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fear and desperation. He didn't answer. Instead, he raised his hand, and I saw the silver key glinting in the dim light. He took a step closer, and I could see the black, soulless eyes staring into mine, as if they were trying to pull me into the void. I reached out, my hand trembling, and grabbed the key. The man's grip was cold and unyielding, but I pulled with all my strength. The key came free, and I stumbled backward, the door behind me finally giving way. I fell through the door and onto the platform of the next station. The train screeched to a halt, and the man in the corner disappeared into the darkness. I lay on the platform, gasping for breath, the cold air a welcome relief after the oppressive atmosphere of the train. I looked back at the train, and for a moment, I could see the man in the corner, his gaunt, hollow face staring back at me. Then he was gone, and the train pulled away, leaving me alone on the platform. I stood up, my legs shaking, and walked away from the station, never looking back. The memory of that night would stay with me forever, a haunting reminder of the unexplainable and the unknown. The train pulled away, its lights fading into the distance, and I stood on the platform, my legs shaking. The cold air was a welcome relief after the oppressive atmosphere of the coach, but the memory of the man in the corner, his chilling whisper, and the inhuman growl still lingered in my mind. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself, but the sense of unease remained, a constant presence at the edge of my consciousness. I walked away from the station, the dim streetlights casting long shadows on the ground. The night was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I tried to focus on the present, on the familiar sights and sounds of the city, but the images of the train, the empty coach, and the man in the corner kept replaying in my mind. I reached my apartment, the familiar surroundings offering a sense of security. I locked the door behind me and leaned against it, taking a moment to catch my breath. The apartment was dark, and I flicked on the lights, the sudden brightness a stark contrast to the dim, flickering lights of the train. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains to look outside. The city was still, the streets empty at this late hour. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to look around the room, half expecting to see the man in the corner, but the apartment was empty. I shook off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination, a lingering effect of the night's events. But deep down, I knew something was still not right. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, the familiar sounds of the news and the weather report a comforting background noise. I sat on the couch, but the images of the train kept flashing in my mind. The man's gaunt, hollow face, his black, soulless eyes, and the chilling whisper, "This train never stops." I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days that followed were a blur of routine and distraction, but the memory of that night on the train refused to fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still following me, a presence that lingered at the edge of my consciousness. I tried to focus on my work, on the mundane tasks that filled my days, but the images of the man in the corner, his chilling whisper, and the inhuman growl haunted my every waking moment. I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there, his gaunt, hollow face watching me from the shadows. The feeling of being watched never left me, a constant, unshakable presence that made even the most ordinary tasks feel like a chore. I tried to rationalize it, telling myself it was just the lingering effect of a traumatic experience, but deep down, I knew it was more than that. One evening, as I was walking home from work, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the street was empty, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. The apartment was dark, and I flicked on the lights, the sudden brightness a stark contrast to the dim, flickering lights of the train. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains to look outside. The city was still, the streets empty at this late hour. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to look around the room, half expecting to see the man in the corner, but the apartment was empty. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, the familiar sounds of the news and the weather report a comforting background noise. I sat on the couch, but the images of the train kept flashing in my mind. The man's gaunt, hollow face, his black, soulless eyes, and the chilling whisper, "This train never stops." I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The days turned into weeks, and the haunting presence never left me. I tried to go about my life as normally as possible, but the memory of that night on the train was a constant shadow. I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the corner, his gaunt, hollow face watching me from the shadows. The feeling of being watched never left me, a constant, unshakable presence that made even the most ordinary tasks feel like a chore. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. It was just a fleeting image, a dark figure standing behind me, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I turned around, but the room was empty. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The city was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I walked, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the street was empty. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. The apartment was dark, and I flicked on the lights, the sudden brightness a stark contrast to the dim, flickering lights of the train. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains to look outside. The city was still, the streets empty at this late hour. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to look around the room, half expecting to see the man in the corner, but the apartment was empty. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, the familiar sounds of the news and the weather report a comforting background noise. I sat on the couch, but the images of the train kept flashing in my mind. The man's gaunt, hollow face, his black, soulless eyes, and the chilling whisper, "This train never stops." I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The weeks turned into months, and the haunting presence became a part of my daily life. I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see the man in the corner, his gaunt, hollow face watching me from the shadows. The feeling of being watched never left me, a constant, unshakable presence that made even the most ordinary tasks feel like a chore. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. It was just a fleeting image, a dark figure standing behind me, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I turned around, but the room was empty. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The city was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I walked, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the street was empty. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. The apartment was dark, and I flicked on the lights, the sudden brightness a stark contrast to the dim, flickering lights of the train. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains to look outside. The city was still, the streets empty at this late hour. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to look around the room, half expecting to see the man in the corner, but the apartment was empty. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, the familiar sounds of the news and the weather report a comforting background noise. I sat on the couch, but the images of the train kept flashing in my mind. The man's gaunt, hollow face, his black, soulless eyes, and the chilling whisper, "This train never stops." I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The final revelation came on a cold, dark night, months after my harrowing experience on the train. I had been trying to live a normal life, but the memory of that night refused to fade. The man in the corner, his chilling whisper, and the inhuman growl haunted my every waking moment. I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there, his gaunt, hollow face watching me from the shadows. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. It was just a fleeting image, a dark figure standing behind me, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I turned around, but the room was empty. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The city was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I walked, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the street was empty. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. The apartment was dark, and I flicked on the lights, the sudden brightness a stark contrast to the dim, flickering lights of the train. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains to look outside. The city was still, the streets empty at this late hour. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to look around the room, half expecting to see the man in the corner, but the apartment was empty. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, the familiar sounds of the news and the weather report a comforting background noise. I sat on the couch, but the images of the train kept flashing in my mind. The man's gaunt, hollow face, his black, soulless eyes, and the chilling whisper, "This train never stops." I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The final confrontation came on a cold, dark night, months after my harrowing experience on the train. I had been trying to live a normal life, but the memory of that night refused to fade. The man in the corner, his chilling whisper, and the inhuman growl haunted my every waking moment. I found myself looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him there, his gaunt, hollow face watching me from the shadows. One evening, as I was getting ready for bed, I caught a glimpse of something in the mirror. It was just a fleeting image, a dark figure standing behind me, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. I turned around, but the room was empty. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the feeling of unease persisted. I decided to take a walk, hoping the fresh air would clear my mind. The city was quiet, the only sounds the distant hum of traffic and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. As I walked, I felt a cold breath on the back of my neck. I spun around, but the street was empty. I quickened my pace, my heart pounding in my chest, and didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. The apartment was dark, and I flicked on the lights, the sudden brightness a stark contrast to the dim, flickering lights of the train. I moved to the window, pulling back the curtains to look outside. The city was still, the streets empty at this late hour. As I stood there, I felt a chill run down my spine. I turned to look around the room, half expecting to see the man in the corner, but the apartment was empty. I tried to distract myself by turning on the television, the familiar sounds of the news and the weather report a comforting background noise. I sat on the couch, but the images of the train kept flashing in my mind. The man's gaunt, hollow face, his black, soulless eyes, and the chilling whisper, "This train never stops." I couldn't shake the feeling that he was still out there, watching, waiting. The thought sent a shiver down my spine, and I realized that the nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. The last swimmer of the pool. My friend Rohit and I had always been adventurous, but nothing could have prepared us for what happened that fateful night. It was midnight, and the moon cast an eerie, silvery glow over the water of our apartment swimming pool. The entire area was deserted, only the two of us were there. The air was thick with the scent of chlorine and the faint hum of the pool's filtration system. We had decided to take a late-night dip, a rare treat in the quiet of the night. The water felt strangely cold and deep, as if it had no bottom. It was a stark contrast to the usual warmth we experienced during the day. We were enjoying our swim, the cool water invigorating and the silence around us almost meditative. We splashed and joked, the tension of the day melting away with each stroke. Suddenly, Rohit's voice cut through the tranquility. "Bro, who is that third person?" I laughed, thinking he was playing a prank. "Don't be silly, it's just us." But his face had turned pale, and his eyes were fixed on something deep under the water. I thought he was joking, but the look on his face was one of genuine fear. His eyes were wide, and his breathing had become shallow. "Rohit, what are you talking about?" I asked, my laughter fading into concern. "There's no one else here." He pointed a trembling finger into the water. "There, look. Down there." I followed his gaze, and a chill ran down my spine. There was someone else down there. Or rather, something. Its face was deathly pale, almost like rotting skin. Its eyes were small and lifeless, and its lips curled into an eerie, unnatural smile. It wasn't moving, just watching us with an unsettling intensity. I immediately turned on my flashlight and pointed it into the water. The moment the beam touched it, it started to move, slowly, as if someone had awakened it. Its movements were jerky and unnatural, like a marionette with broken strings. And as its head rose above the surface, it let out a chilling laugh. "I want to play too," it said, its voice horrifying. It didn't come from just one place. It sounded like it was echoing from underwater and right beside me at the same time. Rohit screamed and yanked me out of the pool. We ran as fast as we could and locked ourselves in the changing room. Our hearts were pounding, and our breaths came in short, ragged gasps. We leaned against the door, trying to catch our breath and process what had just happened. But the nightmare wasn't over. In the mirror, we saw wet handprints, like someone had just been standing there. But the most terrifying part? The reflection should have only shown me and Rohit. But there was a third face. That same pale face. That same twisted smile. Rohit's eyes met mine, and we both knew we had to get out of there. We stumbled out of the changing room and sprinted back to our apartment, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the empty corridors. We didn't stop until we were safely inside, the door locked behind us. The next day, we were both a mess. Dark circles under our eyes and a lingering sense of dread. We decided to confront the security guard, hoping for some answers. We asked him for the CCTV footage from the night before. He frowned and said, "It was just the two of you. No one else was there." But we knew the truth. Something was still there. It only appeared at midnight, and it was still waiting for a new game to begin. The following days were a blur of restless nights and paranoid thoughts. Rohit and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, that something was lurking just out of sight. We decided to investigate further, hoping to find some explanation for what we had seen. We started by gathering information about the pool and its history. The apartment complex had been built about 20 years ago, and the pool had always been a popular feature. However, there were whispers of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances. We dug deeper and found old newspaper clippings and forum posts that spoke of a dark legend surrounding the pool. According to the stories, a young woman had drowned there many years ago, and her spirit was said to haunt the water. Rohit and I were skeptical at first, but the more we read, the more the pieces started to fall into place. We decided to talk to the residents who had been living in the complex for a long time. One of them, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gupta, shared a chilling story with us. Many years ago, a young girl named Priya used to swim in this pool every day, she said, her voice trembling. She was a beautiful girl, full of life. But one night, she never came home. They found her body in the pool the next morning. They said she had drowned, but the water was too shallow for that to happen. Some say she was taken by something that lives in the water. We thanked Mrs. Gupta and left, our minds racing with the new information. We decided to visit the pool again, this time during the day, hoping to find some physical evidence. The pool looked different in the daylight, less menacing, but the memory of that night still lingered. We examined the edges of the pool, the filtration system, and even the changing rooms, but found nothing out of the ordinary. Despite the fear that gripped us, we knew we had to return to the pool at midnight to see if the entity would appear again. We armed ourselves with flashlights, a camera, and a voice recorder, determined to capture evidence of what we had seen. We arrived at the pool just before midnight, the air thick with anticipation. As the clock struck 12, the atmosphere changed. The moonlight seemed to intensify, casting long, distorted shadows. The water was still and dark, a perfect mirror of the night sky. We stood by the edge, our hearts pounding in our chests. Suddenly, Rohit whispered, "Do you hear that?" I strained my ears and heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was like a distant whisper, growing louder with each passing second. The sound of water rippling, as if something was moving beneath the surface. "Rohit, get ready," I said, my voice steady despite the fear. We turned on our flashlights and pointed them into the water. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing the surface of the water, but nothing more. Then, it happened. The water began to ripple, and a pale hand emerged, followed by an arm. The face appeared next, that same deathly pale face with lifeless eyes and a twisted smile. It let out a chilling laugh, the sound echoing around us. "I want to play too," it said, its voice a haunting whisper. Rohit and I froze, our flashlights trembling in our hands. The entity rose out of the water, its movements slow and deliberate. It was a woman, but not in the way we remembered from the stories. Her skin was translucent, and her hair floated around her like seaweed. She was beautiful, but in a terrifying, otherworldly way. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She smiled, her lips curling into a grotesque grin. "I am the last swimmer of the pool. I have been waiting for you." We backed away, our hearts racing. The entity took a step forward, and the water around her began to churn. We turned and ran, the sound of her laughter echoing behind us. We didn't stop until we were back in the safety of our apartment. The next day, we were more determined than ever to uncover the truth. We decided to visit the local library and search for any records or documents that might shed light on the pool's history. The librarian, a kind old man named Mr. Sharma, was intrigued by our quest and helped us dig through old archives. We found a series of articles from the local newspaper, dating back to the 1990s. They detailed the construction of the apartment complex and the pool, but also mentioned a series of strange incidents. One article caught our attention in particular. It described a young woman named Priya who had gone missing from the pool. The police had found her body the next morning, but the cause of death was never officially determined. The article also mentioned that the pool had been closed for a week following the incident, but no one ever spoke about what had happened during that time. We asked Mr. Sharma if he knew anything more about the case. He nodded, his eyes clouding with memories. "I remember that night well. The entire complex was in shock. They said the pool was cursed, but no one believed it. The management tried to hush it up, but the rumors persisted." We thanked Mr. Sharma and continued our search. We found a few more articles and personal accounts, but they all painted a similar picture. The pool had a dark history, and many believed it was haunted by the spirit of Priya. Determined to put an end to the mystery, we decided to return to the pool one last time. We knew it was dangerous, but we couldn't let the entity continue to haunt the place. We gathered all the information we had and formulated a plan. We would use the flashlights and camera to capture evidence, and we would try to communicate with the entity, hoping to understand why it was still there. We arrived at the pool just before midnight, our nerves on edge. The atmosphere was tense, and the air felt heavy with anticipation. As the clock struck 12, the water began to ripple, and the entity appeared once again. This time, it didn't speak. It just watched us, its eyes fixed on us with an unsettling intensity. "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear. The entity's smile widened, and it took a step forward. "I am here because I was forgotten. I was taken from this world, and no one remembered me. I want to play, to be remembered." Rohit and I exchanged a glance. We realized that the entity was not just a malevolent spirit but a lost soul, seeking recognition and closure. We decided to try and help it find peace. "We remember you, Priya," I said, using the name we had learned from the articles. "We know what happened to you, and we want to help you find peace." The entity's expression changed, and for a moment, it looked almost human. Its eyes filled with a mix of confusion and hope. "You remember me?" "Yes, we do," Rohit said, his voice gentle. "We know you were taken from this world unfairly, and we want to help you move on." The entity hesitated, and then it began to speak, its voice softer this time. "I was so alone. I wanted to be remembered, to be loved. But no one ever came for me. I was left here, in this pool, forever." We listened, our hearts heavy with the weight of her words. "We're here now, Priya. We remember you, and we want to help you find peace." The entity's smile faded, and for a moment, it looked almost peaceful. Then, it began to fade, its form becoming translucent and ethereal. "Thank you," it whispered. "I can finally rest." As the entity disappeared, the water around us calmed, and the air felt lighter. We knew that the pool was no longer haunted, and that Priya's spirit had found the peace it had been seeking for so long. The next day, we shared our experience with the management of the apartment complex and the other residents. They were skeptical at first, but the evidence we had captured on camera and the voice recorder convinced them. The pool was closed for a week, and a memorial service was held for Priya. The residents placed flowers and candles around the pool, and many shared their own stories and memories. The pool was reopened, and the atmosphere around it changed. It was no longer a place of fear, but a place of remembrance. People began to swim there again, and the pool became a symbol of the community's ability to heal and move forward. Rohit and I never forgot what we had experienced that night. The memory of Priya's spirit and her haunting smile stayed with us, a reminder of the importance of remembering and honoring those who have been forgotten. We continued to live our lives, but with a newfound appreciation for the stories and histories that shape the places we call home. And whenever we go near a swimming pool, we feel a sense of peace, knowing that the smile that once lurked beneath the surface is no longer there, but has found the rest it so desperately needed. The Cursed Path of the Jungle. My friend Shubham and I had always been adventurous, but nothing could have prepared us for what we experienced that day. We had planned a weekend trip to explore a dense, ancient jungle that was said to be one of the most untouched and mysterious places in the region. The jungle was so dense that even during the day, sunlight barely peeked through the thick leaves. The air was humid and heavy, and the sounds of nature were both enchanting and unsettling. We set out early in the morning, armed with a map, a compass, and a sense of excitement that was hard to contain. The jungle was a labyrinth of towering trees, thick underbrush, and a myriad of sounds that seemed to whisper secrets of the past. The ground was soft and damp, and the air was filled with the scent of earth and foliage. We walked for hours, taking in the beauty of the place, but as the day wore on, the sun began to set, and an eerie silence took over the jungle. The sky was slowly changing colors, the sun was setting, and the once vibrant jungle seemed to turn into a place of shadows and whispers. The wind was picking up, and the leaves rustled in a way that felt like the jungle itself was breathing. The once inviting path we had followed began to blur into the dense undergrowth, and we realized we had lost our way. Shubham stopped and looked around, his face a mix of confusion and concern. "Bro, we need to find our way back before it gets dark," he said, his voice tinged with urgency. I nodded, my heart pounding in my chest. The thought of being lost in the jungle at night was terrifying. We retraced our steps, but every path looked the same. The dense foliage and the fading light made it impossible to navigate. Panic began to set in, and we both knew we needed to find a way out quickly. That's when we saw a narrow dirt path cutting through the jungle. Shubham's eyes lit up with hope. "Bro, I think this leads to the highway," he said, pointing to the path. Without thinking much, we started walking down it. But as soon as we stepped onto it, we noticed something strange. With every step we took, the branches of the trees started bending lower, as if trying to pull us in. At first, we thought it was just the wind, but as we moved forward, the branches seemed to curl even more, as if they were trying to wrap around us. The path was narrow and overgrown, and the trees on either side seemed to lean in, creating a tunnel of sorts. The air grew colder, and the rustling of the leaves became more pronounced. The path was barely visible, and we had to use our hands to push aside the branches that seemed to be reaching out to us. Shubham's pace quickened, and I followed, my heart racing. "What's happening?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Shubham didn't answer, his eyes fixed ahead. The path seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the trees grew taller and more menacing. Suddenly, Shubham froze in place. His face turned pale, as if fear had completely taken over his body. I asked, "What happened?" He trembled and whispered, "Bro, look behind us." I turned around slowly, and what I saw sent chills down my spine. The path we had just walked on had disappeared. All we could see were tall, towering trees, as if the path had never existed. No sign of where we had come from, only darkness and endless trees. My breathing became heavy. "How is this possible?" I muttered, shaking, and then a chilling voice echoed through the air. "Whoever enters the jungle belongs to the jungle." That voice was not human. It was layered, as if multiple voices were speaking at once. My legs felt weak, and without thinking, We both turned around and ran in the opposite direction. But there was no way out, only more jungle, trees stretching endlessly in every direction. As we ran, the branches seemed to move faster, almost as if they were alive. They whipped at us, scratching our skin and tangling in our hair. The air grew thicker, and the sounds of the jungle became more intense. It was as if the jungle itself was alive and determined to keep us trapped. Suddenly, a strange weight pressed down on my chest, as if something was holding me back. Shubham screamed, "It won't let us leave." I felt a surge of panic and tried to push forward, but it was like running through a thick, viscous substance. The branches seemed to grow thicker and more entangled, and the path became narrower. We stumbled and fell, but we got back up, driven by the fear of what lay ahead. The jungle was alive, and it was determined to keep us. The air was filled with a thick, almost tangible darkness, and the sounds of the jungle were now a cacophony of whispers and growls. Then, something even more terrifying appeared, a red handprint on the ground, as if drawn in blood. Beneath it, something was written, "You belong to the jungle now." My vision blurred. Darkness took over. The last thing I could hear was the haunting laughter echoing through the air. And then, everything went silent. When I opened my eyes, we were standing in the middle of the road. No jungle, no trees. Just a straight highway. But one thing was different. On Shubham's hand, the same red mark remained. The words still clear, "You belong to the jungle now." Since that day, whenever I pass by a jungle, I feel like that path is still calling me, waiting to pull me back inside. The return to the jungle the days following our harrowing experience were a blur of confusion and fear. Shubham and I barely spoke about what had happened, but the red mark on his hand was a constant reminder of the jungle's curse. We both tried to return to our normal lives, but the memory of that cursed path lingered, haunting our dreams and waking thoughts. A few months later, we received an invitation to a local festival in a nearby village. The festival was known for its traditional dances, music, and stories of the region's folklore. We decided to attend, hoping it would help us forget the terrifying experience we had endured. The village was quaint and picturesque, with narrow streets lined with colorful houses and a vibrant market square. The festival was in full swing, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter, music, and the scent of delicious food. As we wandered through the festival, we came across a group of elders gathered around a fire, sharing stories. One of the elders, an old man with a long, silver beard, caught our attention. He was telling a story about the cursed jungle, and as we listened, we realized it was the same jungle we had explored. The old man spoke in a deep, resonant voice, his eyes gleaming with the firelight. Many years ago, a powerful shaman lived deep within the jungle. He was a guardian of the forest, tasked with protecting it from those who sought to harm it. But the shaman was not alone. He had a spirit companion, a being of immense power that he called upon to aid him in his duties. Together, they watched over the jungle, ensuring that it remained untouched and sacred. He paused, taking a deep breath before continuing. One day, a group of hunters entered the jungle, intent on exploiting its resources. The shaman and his spirit companion tried to warn them, but they were ignored. The hunters cut down trees, killed animals, and desecrated the sacred sites. The shaman and his spirit companion were enraged, and they cast a powerful curse upon the jungle. From that day forward, anyone who entered the jungle would belong to it, forever bound by its will. The old man's eyes locked onto ours, and he said, "You too, I sense that you have encountered the curse. The mark on your friend's hand is a sign that the jungle has claimed you. But there is a way to break the curse, if you are brave enough to face it." Shubham and I exchanged a look, both of us feeling a mix of fear and curiosity. The old man continued, "To break the curse, you must return to the jungle and find the shaman's hidden temple. There, you will find the key to breaking the curse. But be warned, the jungle will not make it easy. It will test your courage, your will, and your faith. Only those who are pure of heart and strong of spirit will succeed." We left the festival that night with a heavy heart and a sense of foreboding. The old man's words had stirred something deep within us, a desire to confront the curse and reclaim our freedom. We decided to return to the jungle, determined to break the curse and free ourselves from its hold. The next morning, we set out early, our minds made up. We packed our bags with essentials: food, water, a map, a compass, and a flashlight. We also brought a few items the old man had suggested, including a sacred amulet and a vial of blessed water. The journey back to the jungle was long and arduous, but we were determined. As we approached the edge of the jungle, the familiar sense of dread washed over us. The trees loomed tall and menacing, and the air was thick with the scent of earth and decay. We took a deep breath and stepped into the jungle, the ground soft and damp beneath our feet. The path we had taken before was still there, but it looked different, more overgrown and sinister. The trees seemed to lean in, as if trying to block our way. We followed the path, our hearts pounding with a mix of fear and determination. As we walked, the jungle grew denser, and the air grew colder. The sounds of the jungle were more intense, and the branches of the trees seemed to reach out to us. We pushed through the underbrush, our hands and faces scratched by thorns and sharp leaves. The path was barely visible, and we had to use our compass to navigate. The deeper we went, the more the jungle seemed to come alive. The branches moved faster, and the air grew thicker. We could hear whispers and growls, and the ground beneath our feet felt unstable. We knew the jungle was trying to deter us, but we pressed on, driven by the need to break the curse. After what felt like hours, we came to a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone temple, hidden by the thick foliage. The temple was ancient, its walls covered in moss and vines. The entrance was guarded by two stone statues, their eyes hollow and eerie. The air around the temple was heavy with a sense of foreboding. We approached the temple, our hearts racing. The red mark on Shubham's hand glowed faintly, as if reacting to the temple's presence. We pushed aside the vines and stepped inside. The air inside the temple was cold and damp. The walls were covered in ancient carvings, depicting scenes of the shaman and his spirit companion. We followed the carvings, which led us deeper into the temple. The deeper we went, the more the air grew colder, and the darkness grew thicker. We reached a chamber at the heart of the temple, where a stone altar stood. On the altar lay a small, intricately carved key. As we approached the altar, the air around us seemed to vibrate with energy. The key glowed with a faint, otherworldly light. We reached out to touch it, but as we did, the ground beneath us began to shake. The walls of the chamber cracked, and the air grew even colder. A voice echoed through the chamber, the same layered voice we had heard in the jungle. "Whoever enters the jungle belongs to the jungle. You have come far, but the jungle will not let you leave without a price." The voice was followed by a burst of energy that knocked us off our feet. The ground trembled, and the walls of the chamber began to collapse. We scrambled to our feet and grabbed the key, but as we did, the entrance to the chamber sealed shut, trapping us inside. We were in a small, dark room, with no way out. The air was thick with a sense of despair, and the darkness seemed to press in on us. We knew we had to find a way out, but the key was our only hope. We stood in the small, dark room, the key in our hands, and the weight of the jungle's curse pressing down on us. The air was thick with a sense of despair, and the darkness seemed to be alive, reaching out to us with a malevolent intent. We knew we had to find a way out, but the key was our only hope. Shubham held the key up, and it glowed faintly in the darkness. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. "We need to find a way to use this key. The old man said it would break the curse, but we need to figure out how." We examined the key, its intricate carvings telling a story of the shaman and his spirit companion. The key was made of a strange, dark metal, and it felt cold to the touch. We noticed a small inscription on the key, written in an ancient language. We couldn't read it, but we knew it was important. Suddenly, a faint light appeared in the corner of the room. We turned to see a small, glowing orb floating in the air. The orb pulsed with a soft blue light, and it seemed to be guiding us. We followed the orb, and it led us to a hidden passage in the wall. The passage was narrow and dark, but the orb's light illuminated our path. We crawled through the passage, the walls pressing in on us. The air was thick with the scent of earth and decay, and the darkness seemed to be alive, whispering secrets and warnings. The passage twisted and turned, and we felt like we were being led deeper into the heart of the jungle. Finally, we emerged into a small, circular chamber. The chamber was dimly lit by the same blue light that had guided us. In the center of the chamber stood a stone pedestal, and on the pedestal was a small, ancient book. The book was bound in dark leather, and it glowed with the same blue light as the orb. We approached the pedestal, and the orb floated above the book, as if inviting us to open it. Shubham hesitated, but I took a deep breath and reached out to touch the book. As my hand made contact with the leather, the book opened on its own, revealing pages filled with ancient symbols and incantations. The first page contained a map of the jungle, with a path leading to the temple. The path was marked with the same red handprint we had seen before, and the words, "You belong to the jungle now," were written in blood. The next page contained an incantation, written in the same ancient language as the inscription on the key. We realized that the incantation was the key to breaking the curse. We needed to recite the incantation and use the key to unlock the temple's secret. We took a deep breath and began to recite the incantation, our voices echoing in the chamber. As we spoke the words, the air around us began to vibrate with energy. The walls of the chamber glowed with a soft blue light, and the ground beneath our feet trembled. The key in Shubham's hand began to glow brighter, and the red mark on his hand pulsed with a faint red light. When we finished the incantation, a burst of energy exploded from the key, filling the chamber with a blinding light. The walls of the chamber shattered, and the ground opened up, revealing a path that led out of the temple. The path was illuminated by the same blue light that had guided us, and it seemed to be calling us. We followed the path, our hearts pounding with a mix of fear and hope. The path led us through the jungle, and as we walked, the branches of the trees began to recede, and the air grew lighter. The jungle seemed to be losing its hold on us, and we could feel the curse lifting. Finally, we emerged from the jungle, standing on the same highway where we had first appeared. The sun was setting, casting a warm, golden light over the landscape. We looked at each other, both of us feeling a sense of relief and freedom. The red mark on Shubham's hand had faded, and the words "You belong to the jungle now" were gone. We knew that the curse had been broken, and we were free from the jungle's hold. We took a deep breath, the weight of the jungle's curse lifted from our shoulders. As we stood on the highway, the sun setting behind us, we both felt a sense of relief and gratitude. The curse had been broken, and we were free from the jungle's hold. We looked at each other, our eyes filled with a mix of fear, relief, and a newfound respect for the power of nature. Shubham took a deep breath and said, "We did it, bro. We broke the curse." I nodded, my heart still racing from the intensity of our journey. "Yeah, we did. But I think we both learned a valuable lesson. The jungle is a powerful and mysterious place, and we should never take it for granted." We decided to return home, but we knew that our lives had been forever changed by our experience. The jungle had tested our courage, our will, and our faith, and we had emerged stronger for it. We made a promise to each other to never forget the lessons we had learned and to always respect the natural world. As we walked back to our car, the jungle behind us seemed to whisper one final message, a reminder of the power and mystery that lay within. We both felt a sense of peace, knowing that we had faced our fears and come out the other side. Reflections and new beginnings. The days and weeks that followed were a time of reflection and healing. Shubham and I both took some time to process our experience, to understand the lessons we had learned, and to come to terms with the power of the jungle. We shared our story with a few close friends, but the details were too surreal for many to believe. The red mark on Shubham's hand had faded completely, and the only evidence of our journey was the memory etched in our minds. We both decided to take a break from our adventurous pursuits, focusing instead on more grounded and meaningful experiences. Shubham started volunteering at a local wildlife conservation center, dedicating his time to protecting the natural habitats of animals. I began writing, using our experience as inspiration for a series of short stories about the power of nature and the human spirit. One day, we received a letter from the old man who had told us the story of the shaman and the cursed jungle. The letter was written in a neat, flowing script and contained a message that resonated deeply with us. "Dear Shubham," and said, "I hope this letter finds you well. I sensed the strength and purity of your hearts when you visited the festival, and I knew you were capable of breaking the curse. The jungle is a powerful and mysterious place, and it tests those who enter it. You have proven yourselves worthy, and the jungle has released its hold on you. But the journey does not end here. The lessons you have learned are not just for your own benefit. They are meant to be shared with others, to inspire and guide them. The natural world is a sacred place, and it is our duty to protect and respect it. May your paths be blessed, and may you continue to grow and learn from the wonders of the world around you. With deepest regards, the old man. The letter brought a sense of closure to our journey. We realized that our experience in the jungle was not just a test of our courage, but a call to action. We were meant to use the lessons we had learned to make a difference in the world. Shubham and I decided to start a small organization dedicated to environmental conservation and education. We wanted to share our story and inspire others to respect and protect the natural world. We organized workshops, led hikes, and worked with local communities to promote sustainable practices. As the years passed, our organization grew, and we saw the positive impact of our efforts. We received letters and messages from people who had been inspired by our story, and we felt a deep sense of fulfillment. One day, we decided to return to the jungle, not to explore it, but to pay our respects. We brought offerings of food and flowers, and we placed them at the edge of the jungle. We stood there for a long time, feeling a sense of peace and gratitude. The jungle was still as dense and mysterious as ever, but it no longer held the same fear. We knew that we had faced our fears and come out the other side, stronger and wiser. The jungle had taught us valuable lessons, and we were forever grateful for the experience. As we walked back to our car, the jungle seemed to whisper one final message, a reminder of the power and mystery that lay within. We both felt a sense of peace, knowing that we had faced our fears and come out the other side. And so, our journey came full circle, not just a tale of survival, but a story of growth, transformation, and the enduring power of the human spirit. The cursed path of the jungle had been a trial, but it had also been a gift, one that had changed our lives forever.